Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome to Offseason Live, brought to you by Twins Daily. My name is Nick Nelson of twinsdaily.com, and I am excited here tonight to talk some free agents. We're going to keep our free agent focus going. Just to give you guys a little idea of what the deal is here, the show is called Offseason Live. We do it a couple times a week, bring on some writers from the website to discuss the Twins offseason, some of the targets they might be going after, and who we like, who we feel they really got a chance to bring in, and how the makeup of this team might shift here during the offseason. So we are going to talk about outfield and designated hitter free agents here this evening. And I'm excited to be joined by a couple of Twins Daily writers, people that we love on the site, some of our favorite writers. We've got Mr. Lucas Seehafer and Mr. David Youngs. Lucas, how are you doing tonight? Thank you for joining us, sir.
Doing great. Happy to be here. It's going to be fun.
Yes, it will. David joined us again. He was on an episode last week to chat some free agents. We were talking, I believe, catcher and infield. Were you on the episode of?
Yes, catchers and infield. Yep, we talked about potential future twin Kike Hernandez, and I know we're talking about outfielders tonight. Heck, I hear there's this guy named Randy Rosario who does all right. I don't know. Might as well talk about him.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if the Twins could go sign him. Unfortunately, he is not going to be on the market. So just to give you guys a little, again, it's Offseason Live. We're talking outfield and DH free agent targets for the Twins. If you're watching the show via Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, what have you, you're very welcome to comment. We love to bring your comments and questions into the discussion. Pull them up on the screen. I can see Jake says hello. Hello, Jake. We got Matthew Taylor, another one of our Twins Daily writers, says, what's up, guys? What's going on, Matthew? So if anyone has any thoughts on players they like on the free agent market at these positions, they have thoughts on any of the guys we're discussing, by all means, chime in. We'd love to hear from you. So again, we're talking free agent targets at outfield and DH. So the setup for this discussion tonight is kind of the fact that the left fielder and designated hitter for the Twins for the last 2 years, two very entrenched fixtures. We're already getting, how can you let 100 RBI guy like Rosie walk? I mean, I know it's a controversial topic, but the reality is the Twins there's a good chance they're going to be moving on from Rosario. He's got a high price tag in his last year of arbitration. We discussed that in the arbitration episode. You can go back and watch it via the podcast or the YouTube channel. And Nelson Cruz is a free agent as well. I think a lot of us would like to bring him back at the DH position, but it's not entirely in the Twins' hands here. They're going to have to be competing against an open market. We're talking about a guy who's going to be turning 41. And as we'll see, there's kind of some interesting options on the market at these positions. So let's take a look at some of those options at a high level here as we kind of get started. What we're going to do is we all sort of selected some players out of the market that we're going to make a case for. We'll sort of debate them and how they fit for the Twins. And again, we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on whether or not you're liking these guys as targets for the offseason. When free agency opens up here 5 days after the World Series, and we're in Game 6 now as I speak, so it's coming up fast. So taking a look at this market at a high level, we've got a big list of the free agent DHs and outfielders on the market. Now, I mean, you're going to see some names up here twice on this list. It's kind of a hybrid. I guess a lot of these guys could play some outfield and some DH. That's going to be a theme of the discussion. But of course, Nelson Cruz is at the top of that DH market, very much strictly a designated hitter. Some other names we've listed: Marcell Ozuna, Michael Brantley, Shin-Soo Choo, Jay Bruce, Yaziel Poig, old friend Robbie Grossman, Yoenis Cespedes, Nick Markakis, Logan Morrison, another old friend, and Matt Kemp. That's not a complete list, and obviously there's a lot of guys who could theoretically play DH at a lot of positions, but those are kind of some names that stood out to us. Maybe aging guys who could play part-time DH and take a load off their feet a little bit. You know, that's sort of a benefit in, I guess, playing in the AL, since maybe it's just going to be DH only. We'll talk about that in a sec. Outfielders, George Springer heading up the market here, the top free agent on the market, probably from a position player standpoint anyways. Marcell Ozuna, probably more of an outfielder than a DH, really, and same thing for Michael Brantley. Jackie Bradley Jr., Josh Reddick, Jock Peterson, Grossman, Kevin PR, Matt Joyce, Nick Markakis, Cameron Maben, Jared Dyson, and Billy Hamilton, some speeders down at the bottom of the list. So, again, not not a complete list, but a lot of names here that you can look at and kind of get a lay of the land as far as what's out there. So, we're figuring that Eddie Rosario is going to cost 10 to 12 million to keep via arbitration. I think what we're going to see here is you could use that money in some ways that could potentially get you a better long-term player, or you could save a lot of money to spend elsewhere, which, we've discussed payroll in the past and stuff, and there's going to be some hard decisions that need to be made. But we're going to start out talking about that DH spot because Nelson Cruz, as we mentioned, he might be back. I know a lot of people would like to have him back, but is it wise to dedicate, I don't know, 15 million or so, which might be half of the available spending money you have to sort of an aging player who's maybe coming back on 1 year for potentially a last hurrah? It's a tough call. So we're all going to make a case for, we've all picked out a player that we like on this market. And I'm going to kick it off here. As I mentioned, yes, Nelson Cruz will be tough to re-sign. So let's talk some contingencies at designated hitter. We're going to start out with David's pick. David went with Jay Bruce, a 33-year-old who spent the last year in Philadelphia, been around for a while. He hit 198, 252, 469. So, not a great average or OBP, but he brought the power here in 2020, 6 homers, 14 RBIs. David, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you like about Jay Bruce as a target for the Twins?
Yeah, well, first of all, like you said, Nick, when you look at his stat line there from last year, not impressive by any means, but Bruce is a consistent player. He's a left-handed hitter, and over the years, whether it be for the Mariners, for the Phillies, for the Reds, he's proven that he's got power. He's like we talked about, has played a lot of outfield, but has also had some shoulder problems, but can be a very powerful left-handed hitter. With that as well, he's only 33 years old. Which obviously in the baseball world is getting up there, but it's not your 41-year-old Nelson Cruz. And his consistency is something that just 2 years ago, he hit 26 home runs between his time with the Mariners and with the Phillies. This year he signed to a $14 million contract. Hopefully next year, if the Twins were to make an offer, it would be less than that. So they could probably get him for marginally cheap. But is he going to fill Nelson Cruz's role in the benefit that Cruz has provided for this team the last 2 years? No, I don't think so. But I do think he is someone that can provide power from the left side of the plate and wouldn't be the worst pickup in the world.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're losing a guy like Eddie Rosario in addition to Cruz, it's, bringing in that reliable left-handed power bat is an enticing proposition. I see Kurt says or no, he says 12 million for Rosie is a steal these days. He also says Jay Bruce, what are you smoking? So okay, maybe Kurt's not a huge fan. Lucas, what's your thinking on Jay Bruce? Do you see him as a fit?
Yeah, well, so I guess my thinking for the player that I'll be talking about here next, I believe next or one of the next two anyway, was very similar in that I was looking for, someone who's a veteran, can be had for relatively cheap, and what you're going to get when you bring him on. I think, all those points are, make sense. You wouldn't want him to necessarily be the headliner acquisition of the offseason, but if they bring him in, I think it would be a low cost, low floor, potentially higher ceiling kind of reward.
Yeah, so I see Mike says here, do free agents make as much sense as our own prospects? And that's kind of an interesting point to bring up with regards to this conversation. The thing that I would kind of emphasize is you look at a guy like Bruce, and as Lucas said, I don't think he's going to cost very much. So, if you're still saving, I don't know, $10 million compared to Cruz, that gives you a lot of money to spend elsewhere, but still you're getting a little bit of depth. You're not counting on the prospects right out of the gate. They're going to be here. But if you're able to catch lightning in a bottle with someone like Bruce, that's a big game changer. So I just think that is one thing to keep in mind with this discussion. I would agree. I see H. Anderson Twins here says, I think the Twins need some righty bats. That's kind of my main holdup, I guess, against Jay Bruce. He's a lefty, not a great hitter against left-handed pitching. And just we've seen that has been an issue for the Twins. So I think I'd be looking for someone personally who's going to offset that a little more, especially when you're losing an immensely powerful and productive right-handed bat like Cruz. Any guess, David, on how much it would cost to sign Jay Bruce? Any ballpark?
I would say if he's getting 14 right now, I say 10 or 11 probably. would
Okay.
be the highest that I'd want to go.
I'd be a little surprised if he gets that much in this market, and I think that would probably turn me away just because it's not quite enough of a savings from Cruz to make what's potentially a pretty big downgrade. Moving on to Lucas's first pick at designated hitter, we've got Shin-Soo Choo, formerly with the Rangers. He's up there in age, 38, not too much younger than Nelson Cruz. Had a solid, not great year in 2020, hit .236, 5 homers, 15 RBIs. Lucas, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you like about Shin-Soo Choo as a fit for the Twins?
Yeah, so to be completely honest, I wasn't really in love with any of the people that we had on the list for DH. I think if the Twins do go and get a DH outside of like what H. Anderson said in terms of their own prospects, I like a plan that we'll talk a little bit later on when I discuss my outfield option. But like I said before, when I was looking at Shin-Soo Choo, I was looking for veterans that are going to bring something that on a consistent night and are going to be had for relatively cheap. Looking at Choo's stats this season, kind of like with a lot of different players, they were more on the kind of mediocre, underwhelming end of the spectrum. But if you look at some of the things that he's brought in recent years, basically his batting average hovers around 260, 270. His OPS is kind of in the low 800s, high 700s. Before this year, his last 3 years in home run totals were 24, 21, 22. I also looked at his WAR compared to Rosario's over the last 3 seasons as kind of a estimate as far as what each would bring. Rosario's was 5.6 WAR, wins above replacement, and Choo's was 3.9. So in terms of overall production, not a huge drop off. And I think if you would pair him with, say, Rooker, that'd be a nice way to kind of platoon at the DH. Rooker can then also still play some outfield. So you're still getting the prospect who gets a lot of playing time, but you also have a veteran presence in there, particularly when you face off against right-handed pitchers that you don't think Rooker would necessarily be super successful against.
It's a great point, and something that I hadn't really thought about, I guess, with Bruce as that lefty bat is you do have Rooker, and that does kind of set up a nice little platoon possibility at DH. And of course, either of these guys still can play the outfield. So again, what we're talking about is not really locking ourselves into someone who can't play defense. It's a very limiting type of player to have on your roster, which, I think I'll do it if it's Nelson Cruz and he's hitting the way Nelson Cruz is hit. But as we look at some of these options, we're going to be looking at some guys who maybe have some flexibility. I like Choo. He brings a lot of experience to the table that you're losing with Cruz. Very consistent hitter, very established guy, an OBP guy, which I like. I see Sean here says Choo gets on base like Cruz, and we are weak on OBP. That's something to like. So yeah, a pretty good case here. David, what are your feelings about Shin-Soo Choo? Do you like him?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's important to mention as well that Shin-Soo Choo has a lot of experience with the AL Central. It's no stranger to him by any means. And I think that when you look at a player like Choo, he gets on base, and that replaces some of what the Twins are going to be missing if they don't re-sign Nelson Cruz. I think the biggest factors with him, though, are what we already talked about: age. He's getting old, and he's struggling. He struggled with injury. He had a strained wrist this past year, a strained forearm, I believe, and it certainly held him back this past season. He says that he'd like to continue playing baseball. Obviously, he was quoted saying that he wants to finish his career in a regular 162-game season. Which, I mean, what MLB player wouldn't? So I think he does bring a lot of valuable experience. I just think it comes down to, is he reliable enough where you can stay healthy and be a consistent bat in that lineup?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the price tag. If you can get him at a real reasonable price, I think it looks like it'd be a great move. If he's like, I just want to go to Minnesota, play with these guys and finish my career, I'm not looking for the huge guaranteed, maybe do some incentive-laden deal. But the age and, as David mentioned, the injury factor can be a little concerning. So it really depends on the price. Lucas, any kind of feel on what he might get in what figures to be a somewhat depressed market?
Yeah, he's coming off a $21 million annually, give or take, deal with the Rangers. It's not going to be anywhere near that. I think because of the situation and because he's coming off such a large contract, it's going to be difficult to project contracts for anyone. I could see, people that we think are going to sign for, hundreds of millions of dollars this offseason just not getting quite to that level. And additionally, I think on the lower end of the spectrum, teams are really going to try and sign players like Chu for a lot cheaper than they would have in the past. So I don't know, if you told me he got $5 million guaranteed and with some incentives, it wouldn't surprise me. If you told me it was more around the 10 million, I guess it wouldn't super shock me either.
Yeah, it's we'll see what he gets, but to your point, I think this will be a market where players like that could be had at a bargain, and a lot of guys might just make the decision based on things other than who's giving the exorbitant bid, because they might just not be there. And the Twins have made good cases for themselves with free agents, I think, especially veteran guys. Seemed like Cruz had a real good experience here, so it could be an attractive destination. I see Cheryl here says, who says Rosario and Cruz are leaving, and why on earth would we get, I'm guessing that's Chu. Are you part of the Twins front office? No, Cheryl. So all we're saying here is that there is a possibility that either one could leave, a strong possibility. It seems unlikely that the Twins will be able to keep both of them at a minimum if they want to be able to address their pitching staff and their depth in any way. So we're just looking at what's out there. We're certainly not saying there's no chance that either or even both those guys are back.
If you're saying that we should be the Twins front office, I would absolutely take that job
get us
offer.
out there.
Yeah,
some smart dudes. I see. Eiler says we can't win a playoff game. That seems to be not.
He's not wrong.
A response to anything, but yeah, I mean it is true. There's no denying it.
Fact.
All right, so we're gonna move on to our last of the DH picks. I went with Matt Kemp. Matt Kemp is a right-handed hitter. He played in Colorado this past year. Formerly a tremendous hitter, an MVP caliber hitter in his heyday with the Dodgers. Had a good year with the Braves, but he's getting up there. He's 36. He actually had to settle for a minor league contract last year. That's kind of where it's gotten with him. He's had some injuries. His production has fallen off, but he had a pretty nice year in Colorado. You know, nothing too great. He hit 239, 6 homers, 21 RBIs in the shortened season. What I like about Kemp is I think he hasn't really been a DH or had the opportunity to do it. He's played on a lot of National League teams. I think that at his age, getting him off his feet, he's losing his speed. You know, he still can play some outfield, which you maybe use him out there occasionally, but I see him as more of a primary DH. What I really like is that Matt Kemp just mashes left-handed pitching, and that's such a need for the Twins. He hit 300 with an 855 OPS against lefties in 2020. For his career, 313 average and a 909 OPS for Matt Kemp. So, you know, you talk about the weaknesses offensively on this Twins team, and that's the one that stands out, is they just could do nothing against left-handed pitching. In the presumption that Cruz is gone, you want to replace that powerful right-handed bat. Kemp is not the same quality player, but he's going to be a lot cheaper. And, you know, he has some upside. He has that veteran. He's been a great player in the past. He kind of brings some things to the table, I think. So I like him as a fit. You could maybe rotate him occasionally into the corner spots with Kirloff and Kepler or Rosario if he's back, to kind of get some sort of platoon aspect going there. So that's kind of what I like about Matt Kemp. Lucas, what do you see some drawbacks there?
Well, the main argument in favor of bringing him on, in my opinion, is that he's a right-handed batter that has had success in the past. You know, if you're looking at the list that we had up previously, the only right-handed batters were Kemp, and I believe Puig. There maybe was one or two other ones in there, but I mean, if you're looking to bring in a right-handed bat to serve as the DH or, you know, the kind of that fourth outfielder position, I mean, he's a guy that, you know, why not consider it? You know, the only drawback would be is if it costs a bunch of money to get him. I think he's another one of those kind of like what I said with Chu. He's another one of those kind of low risk, potentially high reward type players that, when we see teams make deep runs into the playoffs every now and then, it's the type of signings like this that they would make that would pay off dividends in the long run. So I think if he can be had for the right price, and if some of the other options that we're going to talk about don't come through, or if Twins just really aren't quite ready to hand over the reins to the Rookers, the Kirloffs, the Larnacks, I wouldn't be opposed.
I agree. And I like Kemp's right-handed bat, especially because I do have faith in Rooker as a long-term asset, but that injury he suffered, and I don't know, Lucas, you're a guy who studies injuries and sort of how the human body responds and how athletes heal. That was a major injury. That was a major arm fracture that Rooker suffered. So I don't know, maybe if you have any insight onto that, or you kind of know the history of an injury like that. Yeah.
So the good news is that he had a true, from everything that's been reported, a true forearm fracture. So the things that people really would be more worrisome if it was more of of a wrist fracture. So we have a bunch of small bones in the wrist, and sometimes if they get broken, they don't always heal fully in a quick amount of time because the blood flow to those bones are just less. With the forearm, it has really good blood supply, so it sounded like they were basically put a pin in it and basically just put it back together, so it should heal completely fully. The only really long-term side effects with that kind of fracture is if sometimes the metal work that gets put in there can be irritating, so they have to go in and take it out. But that's not nearly as bad as a refracture kind of thing. They would still put you out maybe 6 weeks, 2 months kind of thing. But I would say most people return to play pretty quickly, relatively quickly in terms of injury. It's not like a ligament or a muscle where they can take months to get better. Bones usually heal up in a matter of weeks to a couple months at the most. So I think you'll be ready to go by spring training. It just depends on if that the hardware they put in there ever becomes irritated and needs to be taken out again.
Well, that is mostly encouraging. So I feel better. I'm feeling a little more optimistic about Rooker making a fast comeback. So thank you for sharing. David, what do you think about Matt Kemp? Does he interest you at all?
Yeah, well, I think he's somebody that you could get for a fairly decent price. And like you mentioned, Nick, he's somebody that's been around the league a long time, was an absolute stud with the LA Dodgers. And his right-handed hitting against lefties that can't go unnoticed. Mike brought up in the comments 6 home runs in Colorado. I believe that means equals 2 in Minnesota. You got that Colorado Rocky Mountain high air. Certainly it would be interesting to see how those numbers would translate if he were playing at Target Field. But he is somebody that, while isn't going to certainly replace the production of Nelson Cruz, he's someone I think that wouldn't take too big of a portion of that money that you could use to sign other marquee free agents or super middle infield or super utility players. So I think he could be a relatively cheap option for the Twins, and I think there'd be some benefit in that.
Yeah. Kurt says Kemp was a stud with the Dodgers 100 years ago, so thank you. I'll take that as a point in my favor. But it was a little far back. But I don't know, 100 years ago feels like March at this point. So my concept of time is gone. I see John says, "Are we seriously talking about replacing Cruz with another FA? Possibly. Stop it." I know that is not a popular idea. The only reason you would do a move like replacing Cruz with Kemp is just if the commitment is so much more favorable. If Cruz is demanding a 2-year deal and he can get it, I just think that's not a smart move for the Twins. To commit themselves to a player at that age who can't play defense, kind of a restrictive figure on the roster. No guarantee he's going to keep hitting like he has. Nobody here is anti-Cruz. We'd all love to see him back, but it's kind of got to make sense. I see Dave says no to Kemp and Shu, which either means that he liked the Jay Bruce argument the best, or he tuned in after it ended. But either way, that one seems to go pretty well for. I believe was that your player, David?
That I did have Mr. Bruce.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of wraps up the DH conversation. Obviously, what we're looking for here is like cheap kind of players, veteran guys who could replace Cruz, save you some money to spend elsewhere. I see Ron here says, do not sign any DH or outfielders. Use the internal options and use the money on pitching. There's certainly a case to be made for that. And at the end of this episode, we're going to break down the payroll and sort of what the implications are of spending at these positions, whether it's bringing back Cruz and Rosario or going after a higher priced option like we're going to discuss. But that's sort of the advantage. If you can get a guy like Kemp, who, signed a minor league deal last year, so it's really hard for me to believe at 36 on this market, he's going to be able to command any kind of super high salary. It gives you that flexibility to address those positions. You're not totally relying on a guy like Rooker who's coming back from an injury, or Larnach or Kirloff who are totally unproven. But you're not taking a huge risk or making a big commitment. I think that the argument against signing a DH, basically, and we see it here from Sean, I don't see an exclusive DH if not a Cruz signing. We will rotate players in DH if we don't sign Nelly to a year plus an option. If Nelson goes 2 guaranteed, we will pass. Only other option is Chu as a switch hitter. He liked the Chu argument. If he would do a lower cost deal, agree with the righty comment. And then I see that Kurt agrees, no exclusive DH. So we're going to move on to outfield types on the free agent market here who are, if Eddie departs, the Twins probably need some help here. I don't know if you want to just throw Alex Kirloff right into it as a totally unproven guy with nobody else, especially because they could really use a right-handed bat to throw in that mix. That kind of seems like the sort of thing they'd be looking to solve if they were going to move on from Rosario and look elsewhere. But also there's just the fact that, Rosario, for the 12, possibly more million that he's going to make, there's some other intriguing options out there that legitimately could be upgrades. So we're going to take a look at some guys who can play some outfield, maybe rotate through DH, and bring something else to this team. David's first pick is a guy who really, I think he's shooting on the high end here with Eddie's replacement. It's Jackie Bradley Jr., who of course has spent his career in Boston, been a very good player, an outstanding defensive player, a switch hitter, still only 30 years old, had a good season in 2020, hit 283, 7 homers, 22 RBIs. David, tell us a little bit about Jackie Bradley Jr. and what you like about him.
Yeah, well, it certainly is on, I think, the higher end of the spectrum for the Twins. But you know what? You got to shoot for the stars sometimes. Jackie Bradley Jr. has been a staple in Boston for all of his career. And really, like you mentioned, he's an outstanding defensive player. He's played center field. But certainly, I don't think that the switch over to one of the corners would be tough for him. He hit 280 against lefties last year. Now, he is a left-handed hitter. But that's something, that the Twins have struggled with, is left-handed hitting, and he could certainly help fill that hole there. Another reason that I like JBJ, he's got a strong on-base percentage. He finds ways on base. He's speedy. And this year, he was on an $11 million contract for a 1-year or the end of a 3-year deal with the Red Sox. So, like we already talked about, he's somebody that is on that upper end. But if the Twins are looking to sign a bigger name, I think that Bradley Jr. would be a candidate, and someone that I don't want to say wouldn't break the bank, but he'd be pricier. But I think if we talk about the Twins wanting to sign one stellar free agent, he could be a candidate.
Sorry, my mic was off. I like this idea of, instead of just searching for sort of low-cost replacements and plugging holes, you do have some flexibility if you're willing to make sacrifices elsewhere to commit to sort of a new potential core star player. JBJ, as you mentioned, is that. I think, he is a left-handed hitter, not a switch, so I apologize for my mistake on that. But a good player and a guy who can play center field, which I like. The Twins are showing that they need ample insurance and backup, contingencies behind Byron Buxton. So he gives you a little bit in that regard as well. I think if you could end up in a situation where your outfield is Kepler, Bradley, Kirloff, that would be kind of nice, despite being all lefty. Kurt says we're looking for upgrades to a 100 RBI guy. I guess I'm not going to delve too far into this, but Eddie Rosario is a 100 RBI guy because he hit cleanup for the Twins last year, one of the best lineups in baseball history, one of the most powerful lineups. He led the team in RBIs this year because he hit behind Nelson Cruz, who was the only one who hit. I just don't think that's an extremely telling statistic as far as the quality of Rosario as a player. I think you plug someone else into that spot. They're, a guy like JBJ. Kurt says he's not an upgrade to Rosario, not even close. I would disagree, especially because the defense. I mean, Rosario is a terrible defensive player. And you can't overlook that aspect of it. So to me, I think that is a hugely appealing part of him is his great defense, potential Gold Glove defense. Lucas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you're going to bring in someone like a Jackie Bradley Jr., if you're going to bring in somebody like the player I'm about to talk about next, it's mainly because of the defensive versatility that they would bring in addition to their offense. Again, if you feel like, if you want to do some manipulation stuff, I don't know if Larnack or Kirloff are Super 2 status or anything like that, but if you want to do some manipulation of that end, or if you're not really confident in giving them the reins full time, then Bradley Jr. is the type that you could sign, and then if you want to flip him after a year, he would be easily tradable. So I think if you're going to bring in a player that is kind of more of a stopgap, I would be more willing to sign a player that's flippable like JBJ than some of the DH options that we talked about before.
Yeah, the big question to me is going to be I like Jackie as a target. He's a great player. The big question is going to be what kind of contract. he's going to get, I could see him getting a fairly large multi-year deal with some team, and that might not be what the Twins want to do. They've got a lot of outfield depth in their system. That's one of their big strengths, and a lot of left-handed outfield depth, frankly. RP Johnson says sign 10 stellar scouts for $1 million each, has half the payroll of the Twins. That's true and an interesting idea. We got to have an episode at some point here about the best free agent scouts out there. And I mean, on a real note, there's a lot of like scouting talent out there because unfortunately teams have been making huge cuts. It's been a big storyline. There was a story in The Athletic about it within the past few days about all these guys who are losing their jobs. And it's sad, but it creates an opportunity for a team that's willing to go out and spend and hire some guys. And the Twins, at least up until this point, have proven to be a team that is not cutting back. They're not firing people. They're kind of staying locked into their plan, even amidst these challenging economic circumstances. So the question with JPJ, of course, going to be cost, but an intriguing option in the outfield. Next up, we got Lucas's first choice. It's Jock Peterson. He's competing in the World Series right now. He's having a good postseason for the Dodgers. A young free agent, very young to be hitting the free agent market at 28. Only hit 190 this year, but brought the power, 7 homers, 16 RBIs, hit 36 home runs last year. So if you're looking for some left-handed power to replace Eddie, Jock Peterson's a guy who could bring it and will probably cost, I'm guessing, in a similar range. Lucas, what do you like about Jock Peterson as a target for the Twins in the outfield?
Yeah, so before I talk about my likes, I'm going to talk about kind of the 2 biggest negatives. One, he's going to be expensive, and there's no guarantee that the Dodgers are going to let him go, even though they technically traded him last offseason, and he still ended up with the Dodgers after that trade got vetoed. And 2, he's a left-handed bat, so he doesn't qualify the right-handed bat contingency that we talked about before. But what I particularly like about bringing in Jock is that he would be a pretty big defensive upgrade over Rosario. If you watched the game the other night, he made a fabulous running catch in kind of left center. That you just type of play that you wouldn't see Rosario make necessarily. But also I like it because he can introduce versatility within the lineup that would be able to still get Rooker and Kirloff and Sano their at-bats. Basically, my theory is that if you bring in Jock Peterson, not only can he play left field, he could probably play right field in a pinch, and he can also DH. So if you're going to, like, say, play Peterson at DH, you could have Rooker in right field, or you could have Kirloff in left field. You could have Kirloff in left field. You could also have situations where you put Kirloff at first, Sano at DH, and then Peterson in the outfield. You could have Rooker at the DH, Sano at first base, Peterson in the outfield. I think his ability to kind of just influence the flexibility within the lineup would be something that you wouldn't necessarily get with the other outfield options that we're talking about, because he is solid in the field, but he can also hit a bunch of bombs. Now, if he was a right-handed bat, I would say sign me on the dotted line immediately. But because he's a left-handed bat and there is some redundancy there, I think that's the biggest downside. But I just like the potential options that you could have with a person like Peterson in the lineup.
Yeah, it's the good point about the modularity that he brings. I like the idea of getting more flexibility in the way they can use players, the way they can use their bench, which is I guess the appealing thing for a guy moving on from a guy like Cruz, I guess, and being able to rotate people through DH more. You kind of called it out though. The left-handed bat, Matthew says, why spend on another left-handed corner OF with Kepler, Cave, Wade, and Kirloff? Not to mention, of course, Larnach coming up through the wings. That's kind of my big holdup too. Jock is a lefty bat. I don't think hits all that well against left-handed pitching. And I wonder if you're going to have to pay a little bit of a premium just for that Dodger big market postseason mystique that he brings to the table, formerly a top prospect, all that jazz. David, what are your holdups on Jock Peterson?
Yeah, well, I'd say my biggest holdup is probably price and lack of production in the regular season. There is a certain aura around the name Jock Peterson. Competed very well in the home run derby a few years back, and the guy's a stellar postseason baseball player. He handles the big moment well. But I just think that his streakiness could be something that could potentially hurt the Twins more than harm. But at the same time, when he's on, he's really on, and I think there are a lot of benefits to that as well. But I think probably the biggest thing, like you mentioned at the end there, Nick, is just that big city money with LA, and that could potentially hold the Twins back.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to my first option of the outfield group. We each picked 2, so we got 4 left here to cover. I'm going with Yaziel Poig, which probably a bit of a controversial choice. I really, but if we're talking about replacing Eddie Rosario, don't we want a little controversy? Puig is the quintessential Eddie Rosario replacement. I feel like he's fiery. He causes some divisiveness in terms of opinions, and in terms of the statistics that he brings. I mean, he didn't play in 2020, so we've got his 2019 stats listed here. But batted .267, 24 homers, 684 RBIs. Those are pretty much exactly the kind of numbers you would expect out of Eddie Rosario next year. He's about the same age. He's 29. And I think he'll be pretty cheap. He had a hard time finding a job this season. He signed very late in the offseason and then was COVID positive, and the Braves quickly cut bait, and then he didn't play. But so I think you get a good deal on him. And we talked about sort of the modularity. We talked about, I see Puig as a guy who could maybe be a primary DH, rotate through the outfield corners, give you that right-handed bat to mix in with maybe Kirloff and Kepler. And I don't know, the entertainment factor, I think would be kind of fun. I'm not the hugest fan of Puig's antics, but I assume this would be a 1-year fairly cheap deal without a ton of risk, so you can kind of cut bait if things are going sourly. But David, what do you think about Yaziel Poig? You have any interest in that?
Well, he certainly brings the headlines. That's no secret, and isn't maybe as Minnesota nice as some of the guys on the team, but nonetheless, the guy can play. And I liked how we're seeing it in the comments a little bit too, using him as a DH, using him as an outfielder. Like we've talked about all night, the Twins have a lot of depth when it comes to outfield, whether it be Kirloff, Jake Cave, and so forth. And he's somebody that I think that you could get relatively cheap. I hadn't even thought about the idea until I saw that he was your pick tonight. But he's someone that I think certainly is affordable, and I wouldn't be completely shocked if it happened.
All right. Wow. I got you guys. I thought you were going to come after me. I thought I was going to get a lot of Puig hate, but people do not seem to hate this idea. So we'll take it. He's going to be, I see that Mike said, love the Puig humor. There's some reason why no one signed him this year. There's truth behind that statement. I think Puig has a reputation, and he brings maybe some drama that a team doesn't necessarily want to deal with. So that might be a holdup. Also, of course, the price tag. If it gets beyond a couple $1 million, I lose interest there. I see Kurt says Jake Cave needs to go on a separate but related topic, I suppose. That is definitely true. All right. Well, moving along here, we're going to move on to our next in the free agent pool. Another big name player coming up next from David. It's Michael Brantley, 33-year-old, just played in Houston. Unlike a lot of the guys we're talking about here, he did not really have a huge down year in 2020. He hit 300, 364 OBP, 476 slugging, had 5 homers, 22 RBIs. He was kind of one of the stars on that Houston team, which advanced fairly deep in the playoffs. And he is, his track record is tremendous. This is a guy who has been a 4-time All-Star, has been a MVP type player at times. We know him well from his time that he spent in Cleveland. David, what's the case? Because the downside here going in that we're going to have to acknowledge that this is going to be a high price proposition. Brantley is a player.
Yes, and that is probably the biggest downside is the moolah. He's expensive. I know Mike says that. Good luck signing him. Yes, he's expensive, and that's going to be the biggest thing. But there are a couple of reasons why I put him on there tonight. First and foremost, he's as consistent at the plate as any player in Major League Baseball. He's a career .297 hitter, and when you think about a guy like that who's been in the league for as long as he has, that's pretty darn good. Yes, he is a lefty bat, and he hits, I believe, 230 or something like that against lefties this past year. Hit 330 against righties, so it doesn't really fill that gap with hitting lefty pitchers. But at the same time, his knowledge of the AL Central is second to none. The guy spent a lot of his years in Cleveland. And he's somebody that we've seen perform not just for one team, but for multiple teams. And, the likelihood of the Twins signing him, I would say, is low just because there's so much depth in the outfield and you've got young prospects. But he is someone that can play in big time games. We've seen it. We've seen it in the postseason. And I think that he could really he's a left fielder as well. So he could fill that hole of Rosario if he's gone. And would really be a dream situation, in my opinion.
Yeah, you got some agreement here in the comments. Kurt says, I like Brantley. Polads need to write the check. Michael says, Brantley is killer in pressure RBI situations, veteran to the hilt, leader material. That's something you're going to be looking for, I think, if you lose Cruz and Rosario. These are leaders on this team. These are fixtures and players that the guys, especially the young guys, look to. And signing a guy like Brantley might not be that unrealistic if you let Cruz and Rosario go, because those guys figure to make $25 million next year. There's no way Brantley's getting anything close to that. It does take away from your spending flexibility at some other positions, and just the thought of locking into what's probably going to have to be a semi-expensive multi-year deal with a guy who's 33. When you just did that with a guy aging into his mid-30s with Donaldson last year, might be a little bit of a tricky thing to do. Lucas, what are your thoughts on Brantley? Do you see any sort of possibility, and is it something that you'd be behind?
Yeah, so, I mean, I love the idea. I love the player, but I think your last points there, Nick, are just go to show why. Frankly, I'd be surprised if the Twins sign anybody to fill an outfield spot. As the comments had already said, like, hey, we already have Wade, we already have Cave, we have at least 3 outfielders about to come up through the minor league system, maybe even more. So why spend a ton of money on a player like Brantley, even though you can make really good arguments as to why they should do it in the short run? I just think in the long run, that kind of thing is not in the Twins' plans. I think if the Twins weren't necessarily, we've had a lot of talk so far tonight about, hey, if the Twins aren't ready to hand the reins over to Kirloff, yada, yada, yada. Well, they made his MLB debut in the playoffs. I don't think that's necessarily a move you do if you're not ready to hand the reins over to him. So I think if the Twins do sign an outfield player, it's going to be someone that's not in the Brantley situation. It's not going to be a Peterson, kind of these other names that we've dropped so far. And I think it would also be an indication that they're going to trade Cave or Wade or, whoever. Like I said, I think Brantley, Peterson, those kind of players are fun in thought, and you can put the pieces together and say, hey, this is how it worked. At the end of the day, I would be surprised if one of those two guys end up on the Twins.
Yeah, the holdup here is sort of just what Matthew said earlier about Jock too. I mean, signing a veteran left-handed to a multi-year deal when you've got all these left-handed outfielders currently and coming up. I mean, they're just all their depth right now is left-handed corner outfielders. And the scenario in which this becomes maybe sort of feasible and intriguing to me is if the Twins were to sign Michael Brantley to play left field, start Alex Kirloff in right field, and trade Max Kepler, who probably is one of the highest trade value players on the team right now. That's granted not saying a lot since everyone's in a bit of a down stock point right now. But Kepler, with his contract, he still was fairly productive this year. He's a good defender. He can play center field. He's young. I do think he has some value. And if the Twins were looking to shake things up, I'm not sure that I hate a Brantley Kirloff outfield setup for the next several years. I'm not sure that I like it less than a Brantley Kepler, but you're going to be investing more money in Brantley. You are losing that favorable contract. And that, I guess, is sort of the downside you need to keep in mind. Just as a reminder to everyone, we appreciate everyone being tuned in to Offseason Live tonight. Getting lots of good comments. Love all your guys' comments that you're sharing here with us. Moving through the free agent outfielder market here, looking at potential options if Eddie Rosario were to depart. Or if, another scenario that's a little interesting to me, just to go on a bit of a tangent, Matthew Trueblood kind of brought this up when we were talking about the arbitration episode. What if you brought Eddie Rosario back to play DH mostly? That sort of downplays his defensive deficiencies, and maybe you could sign someone who's a little bit of a stronger defender to play left. And that kind of brings us to the next guy in our discussion here. Speaking of strong defenders, we're talking Kevin PR. 31-year-old, played for the Blue Jays for a long time, I believe. Now he got traded to Colorado and finished there this season. Hit 288, 6 homers, 26 RBIs. a good offensive season for a guy who's usually been kind of a defensive outfielder, specializing with the glove, a guy who you've probably seen on Web Gems. He's made some incredible catches in center field, sort of some Buxton-esque catches. And, going back to JBJ, what I said I liked about him, the Buxton insurance factor, a guy who can play some strong center field is one thing I like. Lucas, this is your pick. Tell us what you like about Kevin PR.
Yeah, this pick is all totally made on defense. If you look at his OPS numbers over the last 3 years, they're so small you can barely see them. 798 3 years ago, which is pretty good, but then 719 and then 708 this past year. So trending downward in that direction. If you look at his walk percentage, is actually lower than Rosario's, which didn't even know that was possible. Only walked 2% and 3% of at-bats over the last couple seasons. He also strikes out more than Rosario. But where he lacks in some of those kind of offensive production, he makes up for in defense and kind of defensive versatility. I like this particularly as a move, even if they do bring Rosario back and they then decide, hey, we're going to get rid of one of Cave or Wade and then replace them with a PR type. I think that's where a signing like this could be potentially very valuable to the Twins, because then not only do Cave and Wade, they're okay in the field, but they're not anything to write home about. That's PR's one big strength. So if you're going to ship out one of those lefties that very much overlap with each other, I think he would be a prime candidate to bring in, and he could have for really pennies on the dollar would be my guess.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought too much about him as an option, but I like the right-handed bat. I like the defense, ability to play all three outfield spots. And yeah, you're right. Even if Rosario comes back, he takes away that, they have some bats, they've got a good offensive player, I think, in Jake Cave, a solid offensive player off the bench, and same thing with Wade. Neither one of those guys is really a natural center fielder. And as I mentioned, the Buxton lingering injury factor that's just always going to be there is something you have to think about. Do you want to be making these massive downgrades defensively in the outfield every time he's out? So PR is intriguing to me in that regard. David, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, well, PR is exciting to watch. That's an understatement. The guy is Byron Buxton 2.0 in the field. I just I think that, and no, yeah, he'd be cheap as well. Which is another benefit, but I don't see the Twins making this move. As fun as it would be to watch him. Lucas brought up earlier that he is pretty streaky at the plate. He doesn't bring up a whole lot of he doesn't walk very much at all. And I'm as big of a Kevin PR fan as there is out there. My second favorite team is the Rockies. Was out at Coors Field a couple weeks ago and actually got a Kevin PR jersey on sale. And the price is right on him, but I just don't see it happening.
Wow, that PR jersey could be the hottest jersey seen on a post-game pint or off-season live episode since Nash's baby blue Josh Donaldson jersey.
Hey, we'll see if we can make it happen.
Wes says Cruz needs to stay. We've moved on from the DH conversation, but still the people are lobbying for Cruz. Nate says, as a Cave upgrade, all for this move. I think someone suggested him at the trade deadline. I did hear some buzz about him, and judging by the little thinky emoji, I'm guessing it was Nate who suggested him at the trade deadline. I think, if you're not looking at him as a full-time starter, I think there's a lot of intrigue, especially if he comes at a lower price tag, especially with that defense. Justin says Kepler and pitching prospect for Blake Snow. Have to be a pretty good pitching prospect. I don't know, maybe better than the Twins have, but I like the thought. The Twins have traded with the Rays in the past and gotten some good starting pitching through that method. We will have an episode of Offseason Live coming up, I believe, in like a couple weeks that is totally focused on trade targets, trade scenarios. We'll all kind of bring some ideas to the table. So we hope that you guys will join us for that, and we appreciate you being here. Kurt says, side note, happy Jack Morris Day. Hey, same to you, man. That's didn't even think about that, but it is
National
World Series
holiday
season
in the great state of Minnesota.
Yes, indeed. So none of these guys doing anything for Mike. He says no to PR, no to all the rest. Bring up the young guys, save money, and sign pitchers. Maybe I'll change his mind with my final suggestion on the DH platter here. It's a guy that we know pretty well. We're a little familiar with him. It's Robbie Grossman. 31-year-old, formerly with the Oakland Athletics. hit 241 this year, 8 homers, 23 RBIs. Now, look, I don't believe in miracles or supernatural forces or anything like that, but somehow Robbie Grossman went to Oakland and turned into a top-tier defensive outfielder, according to all the stats. I don't get it. I refuse to believe it. But consistently, all the metrics show he was outstanding. He was a Gold Glove contender. This guy could not. He was one of the worst defenders in the league when he was with the Twins. But here he is, and he's still only 31. So maybe he's figured some things out. And if he can play a little defense in the outfield corners, I feel like bringing back Robbie Grossman is a great fit. This is a guy who specializes in drawing walks, getting on base. As we know, he's got a little power. He's a switch hitter. I think he could very frequently fill in that DH spot that we talked about possibly being open. I think he could play both of the outfield corners. He gives you some flexibility. He's got some familiarity. David, do you like Robbie Grossman at all, or are you ready to wash your hands of that one?
You know what? I kind of like Robbie. When he had his heyday with the Twins, like you mentioned, not great on defense. I like to call him an Oswaldo Arcia 2.0. But clearly things have changed out on the West Coast, and he's someone too that's not going to be ridiculously expensive. And I think that he's someone, or if you sign him to a year deal, that's a possibility. And he's someone too that when you need a bat at the plate, even in a DH role, he's got some power behind him. And out of all the outfielders that we've looked at, this is one of the more realistic scenarios, in my opinion.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. And check it out, Mike, who just said no to PR, no to everyone, now says love Grossman and all the criticism he got when he's with the Twins. He's one of my favorites. I might have broken Mike down on his anti-outfielder position. Lucas, what do you think about Robbie Grossman? The Twins have obviously been here before, but still fairly young and maybe open to coming back.
Yeah, this would probably be the least exciting move that they could make, and also probably the most realistic. Kind of like what David was saying. I think if they're going to bring in anybody, I would expect it to be a Grossman type. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the numbers speak for themselves. He somehow made an adjustment, somehow became more serviceable in the outfield. So I would say if the price is right, then if they really feel like they need to bring in an outfielder, he would be just as good as anyone else that we've talked about to this point.
All right, so it seems like there is actually some steam for Grossman. I figured that would be not the most popular of all possible options, but I think depending on the money, he could be a guy that you bring in and plays a nice functional role. And a lot of it is going to come down to the money, what these guys are going for, and sort of what the priorities are. So that's going to bring us to the way we're going to close this discussion here. Is we're going to take a quick look at the Twins sort of payroll layout for next year, and we're going to see what maybe signing some of these guys would do on that front. So what I've pulled up here on the screen for those who might not be watching is a spreadsheet that our guys at Twins Daily, our guy Matthew Taylor, helped us put together. It's called the Twins Payroll Spender Tool, I guess. If you go to twinspayroll.com, you can go in and play around with it yourself. I think it's very fun. We've got a lot of the left field and DH options we've talked about tonight in here with sort of rough estimate salaries that they might make next year. And you can kind of see how that would fit into the Twins payroll picture here for 2021. We're sort of working under the assumption, obviously nobody knows, but it's widely assumed that payroll is going to drop across the league next year to some extent. I think the Twins will probably drop less than most, but we've got them set at a fairly conservative $125 million payroll, which is a 10% drop. That seems pretty realistic to me. Wouldn't shock me if it's a little lower. Wouldn't shock me if it was a little higher. But that's kind of where we've set the target here, just to give you some context. We filled in a lot of these spots, the obvious guys, the guys who are on guaranteed contracts, or the arbitration no-brainers like Buxton, like Barrios. We got Rogers sticking around for $7 million. That's one of your highest dollar players. We've got Kike Hernandez signed at $7 million here. We discussed on the last episode, utility guys. I think it is important to invest in replacing that Marwin Gonzalez role, because he's gotten so much time and been such a huge player for the Twins in terms of just what they've needed from him with all the injuries. But otherwise, kept things pretty open here, just to kind of give you guys an idea. So, Cave in the outfield, Adrianza for $1 million, Jeffers at backup catcher. Pretty cheap here in the bullpen. We went basically all rookies: Thielbar, Stashak, Littell, Smeltzer. and 2 rookies in the 4th and 5th spots in the rotation with Dobnak and Thorpe. So to give you an idea of what that scenario leaves you to spend, if they're going to 125 million, it's around 23 million bucks. So if we pop in Rosario and Cruz, we have spent that all and even a little more. We're up to 126. That gives us no money to invest in these last rotation spots, which I think going into the season with Dobnak and Thorpe or Smelter as your 4th and 5th starters would be a bit precarious, and no money to invest beyond Rogers in the bullpen. So you're losing May, you're losing Clippard, and you're not really replacing these guys with these high caliber veteran relievers. So that makes me a little nervous. And I know we had some people complaining about why would you lose Cruz? Why would you lose Rosario? This is it right here, folks. I mean, it soaks up all of your spending money. So, you could go for a guy like we talked about Brantley, roughly the same picture. It just kind of depends on if you like Brantley better than Rosario, basically. I do. Sounds like maybe David did. You can go down a tier for guys like Peterson, guys like Reddick, and this starts to give you a little bit of spending money. You go down even further to just want to go with Kirloff. Hey, all of a sudden you got $8 million to spend on that pitching staff. Now you got a little money. If we move down from Cruz, you could go all the way down to Rooker for the minimum salary. All of a sudden now you got $22 million to spend. We're back at that original number basically. Some of the other guys we discussed. Brantley, $11 million. That takes up about half that money that you got left. Chu maybe making $7 million, maybe a little more. Still gives you that spending money. So Bruce and Puig are going to be in that $2 to $3 million range, and that's what we like about them is they give you a veteran guy with maybe a little bit of potential, but still give you that money to spend on the pitching staff if you want to go get some of these names. And these will be discussed on Thursday night's show. I believe starting pitching is going to be the focus on that show. So we hope you'll all tune in for that. So let's break it down here and kind of close it out. Lucas, as you look sort of at this payroll layout here, and you see how making big investments at left field and DH, whether it's bringing back the incumbents or maybe spending on some of the higher tier guys we discussed tonight, you see how that impacts the ability to spend on the pitching staff if we work under the assumption that they're going to be, reducing payroll a little bit. How does that kind of make you feel about just the idea of investing heavily in these positions?
Yeah, no, that is the reason why I think they're going to move on from at least one of Cruz and Rosario, and then probably not really bring in anybody unless it's a PR type or a Grossman type. The need, both in the short term and in the kind of the medium term for this team, is starting pitching, kind of at least getting one more of those starting rotation players. And shameless plug, I wrote an article about that on Twins Daily a couple of weeks ago, where it's like, hey, in the minor leagues, the Twins have just a bulk of outfield depth in terms of prospects. So why not ship one of those prospects? Maybe one of the more established players at the moment, like a Cave or somebody, and go get another starting pitcher, because then not only are you shoring up the back of the starting rotation, but you're not also using up all your free agency money either. That visualization there is the reason why I think we're going to see one of those two not come back and probably be replaced by either Kirloff or Rooker or some combination of the two.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, when you look at the numbers, it's easy to say, hey, bring back Rosario, bring back Cruz, keep the gang together. And I personally would be perfectly comfortable bringing back the same team from this year and running it back. I felt good about this team. I think if they stay healthy, if you can find a way to keep Buxton and Donaldson on the field, this team absolutely has the ability to make a run and win a World Series. Unfortunately, as we see with these numbers, it's just not possible to keep that team together unless you expect the Twins to raise payroll, which I can't see. Kurt says here it's going to be very interesting to see what owners do following the COVID season. My guess is they get real tight. I think that is going to happen. I mean, these are business people, and they are likely to operate conservatively with the uncertainty ahead. It's not just the money that they lost this year. It's that, and there was a report that came out the other day, I think, that said that Major League Baseball lost $3 billion. It's not just about the money that they lost this year. It's about that uncertainty going forward. They don't know if there's going to be fans in the stands or how many. You can't really plan around any revenue certainty. And so I expect a lot of teams are going to knock it down. I think the Twins, as I mentioned, will do it less than most. But that's why these decisions on these outfielders and DH types, when you've got some holes to address in the pitching staff get a little tricky, as Lucas said there. David, kind of what as we wrap it up here, what's your thoughts on the aggressiveness with which the Twins should pursue left field and DH, and do you expect them to keep either Rosario or Cruz?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, outfield is not somewhere where I think the Twins are going to go out and search elsewhere. Make sure to read Lucas's article, heck of an article, and it talks about the depth that the Twins really do have at outfield. I'd say it's probably the Twins outfield and the depth that it has is more fruitful than any other position right now. And when I think it comes down to it, it is going to come down to starting pitching. I could see them going to the market for that. And also that super utility man to potentially replace Marwin. And I know we've talked about guys like Kike Hernandez, Tommy La Stella. But just given what we've seen of guys like Rooker, guys like Kirloff, you've got Lawrence. Now, excuse me.
Larnach.
Is it Lawrence?
Larnach.
Larnach. Hey, third time's the charm. Larnach.
We haven't seen him yet, so how can you know his name? I mean,
hey, there you go. That's my excuse, clearly. But I do think that I agree with you, Nick. It would be great to run it back this year with this next year with the same roster, the same lineup. Because on paper, this Twins team from this year is exceptional. We saw in preseason power rankings, the Twins were right up there with the Yankees and the Dodgers. And that's something that obviously the game is played on a field. It's not played on paper. But that's something that next year, I think just given the current circumstances, while it would be great to see the same team this year, next year, that's probably not going to happen. And I think if you do look when push comes to shove, when it comes to Rosario or Cruz, I think that they part ways with Rosario. As much as we've talked about Rosario tonight, I love to watch the guy play. I think he's one of the probably the most electric player that the Twins have. He can come up in those big time moments, but I think that the Twins part ways with him, and they fill that with some of their studs that are coming up through the system. And that they spend that money on, maybe a less expensive guy like Robbie Grossman, but more so on a super utility man and maybe Trevor Bauer. He hasn't tweeted at the Twins yet. He's tweeted at pretty much every other team, not the Twins yet. So maybe he's saving the best for last.
We'll see. That is a name that I think just might come up on Thursday night. We're going to have another episode, 8 o'clock on Thursday night, same time, same place. Hope you'll join us. I will not be hosting that one, actually, because unlike David here, who is so committed that for the last episode, he was here on his birthday. My birthday is on Thursday, so I'm taking the night off. So Seth's going to be stepping in and looking at some free agent options. So as we kind of established, how much you want to spend here at Outfield and DH comes down to how much you want to preserve for that starting pitching and relief pitching. So we hope you guys will join us for that. We hope you'll stick with Offseason Live. You can always find this content on the site on twinsdaily.com. You can find as well the great writing from writers like Lucas and David. As was mentioned, Lucas wrote a great piece that will be interesting, I think, to people who want to learn about the depth that the Twins have organizational at these positions. I know David just started a story about Minnesota-born baseball players and had an interview with Ken Herbeck that was up on the site. So that was a fun one. So I definitely recommend going to check that out. Kurt says, happy birthday, boys. Hey, Kurt, we appreciate that a lot. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to everyone. Check out the website, subscribe to our YouTube and our podcast. You can always catch the episodes you miss. We'll be back to talk about more free agents later in the week. And so thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, David. Everybody, have yourself a wonderful Tuesday night and go Twins.
Win Twins, baby.